My name is Clara, and though I write these words decades later, my hands still tremble. In 1961, I worked as a nurse in a monastery hospital nestled deep in the Carpathian Hills. It was meant to be a sanctuary, a place where suffering children could find some measure of peace. The nuns and I whispered prayers through the corridors, believing that faith alone could soften pain. But the nights were never silent. At first, I dismissed the sounds, doors opening on their own, the faint echo of footsteps when no one should have been walking. Old buildings creak, I told myself. The stones were damp, the walls ancient. Yet soon, things became harder to explain. The crucifixes nailed firmly above each bed clattered to the ground, as though some unseen hand had ripped them away. Icons slid down walls, their glass frames shattering on the cold stone floors. The children, already weak from illness, began to murmur in their sleep. Strange words, half-formed sentences in Latin none of them could have known. At times I leaned close to comfort them, thinking fever made them delirious. But one night, Elise, a pale girl with fragile lungs who often clung to me for comfort, pulled me close and whispered something that froze my blood. She walks between the wards. Elise breathed, her lips trembling against my ear. I felt her small fingers dig into my sleeve. She's watching you, sister. I wanted to ask who, but Elise's eyes flicked upward, wide with terror, and she pressed her face into my chest as though hiding. I turned, heart hammering, to look across the ward. There was nothing, and yet, for the first time, I felt it, the weight of being observed. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of burnt incense, though no censer had swung in days. Somewhere beyond the dark corridor, a hymn hummed off-key, carried by a voice that did not belong to the living. That night, I did not sleep. The disturbances grew unbearable within days. Patients screamed in the night, their cries echoing down the vaulted corridors. Some nuns swore they saw shadows crawling along the walls like living creatures. Others refused to walk alone after dusk. The Mother Superior, desperate to keep order, finally wrote to the Archdiocese. Within a week, a visitor arrived. He stepped from a black carriage one stormy evening, his cloak heavy with rain. Father Benedict was tall, gaunt, with piercing gray eyes that seemed to measure every soul they encountered. His presence unsettled me, though I could not explain why. He carried a leather satchel bound with brass clasps, worn from years of use. When he entered the hospital, the air seemed to shift. The children hushed, as if they sensed him before they saw him. Elise clutched my hand tighter, whispering under her breath in Latin words I still didn't understand. Father Benedict knelt at her bedside, pressing 2 fingers gently to her forehead. She trembled, but did not pull away. Later, in the Camelot refectory, he spoke to us. His voice was low, deliberate. "I've seen signs such as these before," he said, unfastening his satchel. From it he drew a collection of old parchments, yellowed pages filled with strange sigils and Latin prayers. "This place is not merely haunted. It is inhabited." My stomach turned as he spread the pages across the table. He showed us notes from his predecessors, men who had confronted forces too dark to be spoken aloud. He spoke of a spirit once revered, a woman of the cloth whose devotion twisted into something unholy. A fallen saint, he called her, once bound to serve God, but in death she became a mockery of his grace. She lingers, seeking flesh to anchor her back to this world. The nuns crossed themselves, muttering prayers. I wanted to dismiss his words as superstition, but when I met his eyes, I saw no doubt there. Father Benedict had not come to speculate. He had come to battle. That night, I awoke to the sound of chanting from the chapel. A single candle burned at the altar, and though the pews were empty, I swear I saw a dark silhouette kneeling there, a woman in a habit, head bowed in prayer. When I blinked, she was gone. Father Benedict wasted no time. The following morning, he requested access to the hospital's oldest records, ledgers, burial lists, any documents preserved from before it became a place for children. Most of the sisters were reluctant. The archives had been sealed for decades, collecting dust in the stone cellars beneath the chapel. But at his insistence, I accompanied him down. The air was damp and smelled of mildew. Rats scattered at the echo of our footsteps. Rows of shelves sagged under the weight of leather-bound tomes, their spines cracked and titles long faded. Hours passed as we sifted through fragile pages, but when Father Benedict uncovered a thin, iron-clasped book hidden beneath loose boards, his expression hardened. He motioned for me to sit. "This is no ordinary hospital," he said, his voice grim. "Once, this ground housed a refuge for women accused of witchcraft. Most were innocent, but not all. One among them, a nun who betrayed her vows, turned to the darkness she once condemned. Her name has been struck from official records, but here she remains." He opened the book. Inside were confessions and testimonies written in a trembling hand. It told of a sister who renounced the order, swearing her loyalty to powers unholy. The Mother Superior at that time had ordered her body buried secretly within the grounds, fearful that even her grave would spread corruption. I felt my blood run cold as I traced the inked words. "So she never left," I whispered. Father Benedict nodded slowly. "And her presence lingers, feeding on the innocent." That night, Elise refused to eat. She stared at the far corner of the ward, lips moving silently, as though conversing with someone I could not see. When I knelt beside her, she turned to me, her small face pale as snow. She told me her name. Elise whispered, her eyes glazed. I swallowed hard. "Whose name, child?" Elise's lips trembled as she breathed a single word, so faint I almost didn't hear it. "Agnes." A draft swept through the room, snuffing out every candle at once. The night it happened, the storm outside shook the very walls of the hospital. Rain lashed against the windows, and the thunder rolled so close it rattled the beds. I was on my evening rounds when I noticed something wrong. Every door in the ward stood ajar. The children were awake, their eyes wide, yet they made no sound. Then I heard it, a low hum, like the faint beginnings of a hymn. It seemed to drift from the chapel. My heart pounded as I hurried down the corridor, my lantern trembling in my grip. Father Benedict appeared beside me, his steps swift and purposeful, as though he too had heard the call. When we pushed open the chapel doors, the sight before us made my knees weaken. The children, dozens of them, stood in a circle around the altar, hands clasped, faces blank. Their lips moved in unison, but the words were not of prayer. They were reciting the Pater Noster backwards. The sound was discordant, like broken glass scraping against stone. In the center of the circle stood a figure. She wore the robes of a nun, black as the storm outside, her veil hanging low over a face that seemed more mask than flesh. Hollow eyes gleamed from the shadows of her hood. Her hands stretched outward as if to draw the children closer, and every candle in the chapel burned with an unnatural, bluish flame. "Elise!" I cried out, spotting her among them. She did not turn, did not blink. It was a mask of ruin, skin as gray as ash, lips torn and stretched into an eternal sneer. Her eyes glowed with a pale, blinding fire. She raised her hand, and the reliquary rattled violently against its chains. Elise's voice echoed through the chamber, though she was far above us in her bed. "Give it to me." The reliquary shuddered on the altar as though some unseen force clawed at it from within. Father Benedict gripped it tightly, chains cutting into his hands, his lips moving in prayer. The chamber shook, dust raining from the ceiling. And then came the scream. It wasn't from the catacombs, it was from above. Elise's voice, high and shrill, pierced the stone walls, echoing down into the earth. My heart clenched. I knew what it meant. She was slipping, being taken even as we stood there. "We must return now," I cried, but Father Benedict's face was grim. "If we leave without this, she will already be lost. Hold the light, Clara." I forced myself to stand as he tore the reliquary free from the altar. The moment the chains broke, the nun's form lunged forward, faster than shadow. She struck at him, but the reliquary flared with a searing white glow, throwing her back with a howl that rattled my very bones. We fled the catacombs, lanterns swinging wildly, the wails of the dead following us like a storm. When we burst into the ward above, The sight that met us nearly drove me to my knees. Elise was no longer in her bed. She hovered a full foot above it, her body rigid, her small hands clenched into claws. Her eyes glowed white, and her voice, deep, guttural, nothing of her own, rolled through the room. "He is mine. You cannot take her from me." The windows shattered inward, shards spraying across the floor. The candles blew out, plunging us into a darkness broken only by the unearthly glow from Elise's body. Father Benedict rushed forward, raising the reliquary. "Spirit unclean," he thundered, his voice echoing against the vaulted ceiling. "You shall not take this child." The nun's form appeared again, no longer distant shadow, but standing at Elise's side, her hand laid upon the girl's chest. Through Elise's mouth, she laughed, a cold, mocking sound that scraped at the inside of my skull. "She is my vessel," the voice said. "Through her, I will walk once more." Elise's body convulsed violently. I screamed her name, but her face twisted, contorted by something inhuman. For a brief moment, her eyes flicked toward me, pleading, desperate, as though the true child still lingered within. That was when I realized it wasn't just Father Benedict's battle. Elise was calling to me. The ward had become a battlefield. The walls trembled, plaster cracking as the storm outside roared in unison with the chaos within. The children screamed from their beds, clutching their ears as if the very sound of the possession tore at their souls. Father Benedict stood at the center, the reliquary raised high, its silver gleaming with an otherworldly light. Yet the nun's figure loomed taller now, her veil whipping as though caught in an invisible wind. She clutched Elise tighter, her shadowy form sinking deeper into the girl's trembling body. "You are weak, priest," the voice thundered through Elise's lips. "Faith cannot bind what has been forsaken." Father Benedict's knees buckled, his voice wavering as he continued the rite. Blood trickled from his nose, yet he did not falter. I knew he could not endure much longer. And then Elise screamed, a piercing, human scream. For a moment her voice broke through the demon's growl. Her eyes met mine, filled with terror. "Clara, help me." Something inside me shattered. I fell to my knees beside her bed, pressing my hand against her small, trembling fingers. My lips moved before I even thought. "Our Father, who art in heaven." The words poured from me, raw and desperate, not in the measured cadence of Benedict's rite, but as a plea from a soul clinging to faith. The demon hissed, writhing as if my prayer burned her. Elise's grip tightened on my hand. Father Benedict's voice swelled again, stronger this time, as though my prayer had steadied him. Together, our voices rose above the storm, filling the ward with a fragile yet unyielding light. The reliquary blazed. The nun shrieked, her face twisting into rage, her form peeling away from Elise like smoke from fire. She thrashed, clawing at the air, her voice splitting into dozens, then hundreds, a chorus of hatred. "I will not return to the dust." But Benedict stepped forward, pressing the reliquary to Elise's chest. The silver seared with holy fire, and the nun's figure convulsed, torn between shadow and flame. The walls rattled, the windows imploded, the crucifixes long cast down clattered across the floor as though dragged toward her by unseen force. Then came silence. Elise collapsed into my arms, her body limp but breathing. The nun's scream stretched into nothingness as her form was dragged backward, into the reliquary itself. The glow dimmed. The ward lay in ruins, but the air was still. Father Benedict fell to one knee, clutching the reliquary, his chest heaving. "It is done," he whispered. But I knew from the look in his eyes, it was not truly over. The storm outside died as suddenly as it had risen. The night fell unnaturally quiet, save for the sound of rain dripping through the shattered windows of the ward. I held Elise close, her frail body warm against mine. She stirred, whispering weakly, but her eyes, thank God, were her own again. The sisters emerged from their hiding places, faces pale, habits torn from clutching at walls during the chaos. Some wept at the sight of the children breathing peacefully once more. Others crossed themselves, whispering prayers of gratitude. Yet all of us knew the hospital would never feel the same. Father Benedict remained silent, the reliquary clutched tightly in his hands. Its silver surface was scorched, blackened around the edges, yet still intact. He wrapped it in a length of blessed cloth before placing it back into his satchel. When I asked him what would become of it, he looked at me with eyes so weary they seemed to carry centuries. "It must be hidden again," he said softly. "Somewhere she cannot reach it. Somewhere faith still holds strong." He paused, lowering his gaze. "But know this, Clara, the demon is not destroyed, only bound. She waits for cracks in our faith, and she will wait as long as eternity allows." For days afterward, Elise hovered between sleep and waking, her spirit fragile but untouched. She clung to my hand whenever I sat by her bed, afraid to close her eyes in case she returned. I told her the truth. I wished I believed fully myself, that it was over and she was safe. But at night, when the wind rattled the broken windows, I thought I heard the faintest sound drifting through the halls. Not the cries of children, not the creak of doors. A hymn, sung backward, almost too faint to catch. And sometimes, when I passed the old chapel alone, I felt her gaze upon me, the weight of eyes in the shadows, lingering where no one stood. Father Benedict left the hospital soon after, carrying the reliquary with him. None of us ever saw him again. The sisters spoke of sending the children away, closing the hospital for good. By spring, the wards were empty, the corridors silent. I, too, left those walls behind. But even now, years later, I wake in the night with the memory of Elise's whisper in my ear. She walks between the wards, and in the silence, I wonder if I turned quickly enough, would I see her? Still there, still waiting, her ruined face veiled in shadows. Father Benedict raised his crucifix, his voice booming as he began a prayer of deliverance. The figure shifted her gaze toward him, and though her mouth never moved, a mocking laugh echoed through the chamber. I rushed forward, grabbing Elise's shoulders, shaking her, pleading for her to wake. The moment I pulled her from the circle, the figure faltered, its edges blurring like smoke. Then, with a hiss, it dissolved into the shadows that clung to the chapel walls. The children collapsed all at once, as though strings had been cut from puppets. We carried them back to their beds, their breathing shallow but steady. Father Benedict's face was pale, but his jaw remained firm. "She is growing stronger," he said, clutching his crucifix so tightly his knuckles whitened. "And this is only the beginning." I could still feel it, the echo of her gaze lingering on me, as though she had chosen me in some silent, dreadful way. The following days blurred into a haze of fear and prayer. The sisters tried to resume their duties, but the wards no longer felt like a place of healing. The children woke screaming from dreams they could not describe. The crucifixes we rehung on the walls blackened, the wood charred as if licked by unseen fire. Father Benedict spent his hours buried in the archives and kneeling in the chapel, his whispered prayers echoing long into the night. When I asked him if there was hope, he pressed a book into my hands. Its pages smelled of ash and incense. "She is searching," he told me, his eyes burning with a strange urgency. "There is a relic here, Clara, a silver reliquary that holds a fragment of the true cross. It was once used to bind her spirit, to cast her back into the shadows. But if she finds it first," he didn't need to finish. My stomach tightened with dread. "She will use a child's body," he continued grimly, "as a vessel to walk again among the living. And that vessel," his gaze drifted toward the ward, "she has already chosen." "Elise," I whispered. The air grew colder around us, as though the very stones had listened. That night, I kept watch at Elise's bedside. She slept fitfully, her small chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. At one point, she opened her eyes, not the soft blue I knew, but a blazing, unnatural white. Her lips parted, and in a voice far older than her years, she whispered, "Bring me what is mine." Then her body shuddered violently, and she collapsed back into unconsciousness. I wanted to scream, to flee, but Father Benedict stood behind me, steady as stone. She will not rest until she possesses it, he said. We must find a reliquary before she does, or Elise will be lost to us forever. I prayed, but for the first time, my faith felt like a candle flickering in a storm. The search for the reliquary consumed us. Father Benedict led me through passages beneath the hospital that I had never seen, stone corridors slick with moss, stairways that spiraled into the bowels of the earth. We carried lanterns, their flames shivering in drafts that seemed to breathe like lungs. Yet even as we searched, the entity struck back. One evening, as twilight bled into night, the children began screaming all at once. Their voices rose in a chorus so piercing it shattered glass panes in the ward. I ran to them and froze. The walls bled. Thin rivulets of crimson seeped from the cracks between the stones, tracing crooked lines toward the floor. The candles guttered and died. Darkness swallowed us. A laugh, low and guttural, rippled through the ward. The shadows twisted into shapes that mocked the saints painted on the walls. Elise's body arched upward from her bed, her limbs rigid, her eyes rolling back until only the whites showed. Now you will see. A voice hissed through her lips, though it was not her own. Father Benedict rushed forward, clutching his crucifix. He began to write, his voice booming with authority, Latin prayers ringing like thunder. For a moment, the air vibrated, and Elise's body trembled as though caught between two forces. Then the entity struck. Every lantern burst. Windows cracked. The iron bed frame screeched as though dragged by unseen hands. The children writhed, screaming in terror. My ears rang with the sound of glass shattering, with splintering, voices shouting over one another. And then, the blood. It welled from the walls, dripping faster, staining the floors, streaking across the sheets. The stench of iron filled my lungs, choking me. I wanted to collapse, to cover my ears, but Father Benedict's voice roared louder. The figure of the nun appeared in the corner, half-formed from shadow. Her face was still veiled, but beneath it I glimpsed a grin, stretched too wide, too cruel to be human. She stepped forward, and with every movement, the walls groaned as though the building itself recoiled from her. You cannot drive me away, she spat through Elise's body. Faith crumbles, and when it falls, she will be mine. The crucifix in Father Benedict's hand grew hot, searing his skin. He staggered, his voice faltering. For a heartbeat, I thought the prayers had failed, that all was lost. Then Elise collapsed back on the bed, gasping for air. The figure dissolved into smoke, retreating once more into the shadows. But Father Benedict looked at me, with eyes darkened by despair. She is testing us, he said, his voice hoarse. And next time, she will not simply play. After the failed rite, Father Benedict knew we had no choice. We had to find a reliquary, or Elise's soul would be consumed. He led me back into the cellars beneath the chapel, deeper this time, beyond where the archives ended and the stone grew older, rougher, as though carved by hands long gone. The further we descended, the colder it became. Our breath misted in the lamplight. The silence pressed on us, broken only by the drip of unseen water. Strange carvings marked the walls, symbols that looked neither holy nor entirely human. My hand brushed one by accident, and I felt heat radiate from the stone as if it still remembered fire. At the bottom of the stairwell lay a heavy oak door bound in iron. It groaned open with effort, and the smell of damp earth washed over us. What lay beyond was no ordinary crypt. It was a labyrinth of catacombs. Rows of crumbling alcoves lined the passageways, each holding skeletal remains swaddled in rotted cloth. Some skulls had rosaries tangled between their teeth. We walked for what felt like hours. The air seemed to thicken, growing harder to breathe. My lantern dimmed, its flame shrinking as though smothered by unseen hands. Then at last we found it. A stone altar, half collapsed, stood in a chamber lit by fissures in the ceiling that allowed only the faintest threads of moonlight. Upon it rested a small silver casket, tarnished and bound by rusted chains. Father Benedict fell to his knees, crossing himself. "The reliquary," he whispered. His hands trembled as he reached for it. God preserve us, it still remains. But before he could lift it, a sound stirred from the shadows, ragged breathing, a chorus of voices whispering in unison. The skeletons lining the walls shifted, brittle bones cracking as they turned their hollow sockets toward us. The veil between life and death was thinning. I clutched Father Benedict's arm, my pulse hammering. "She knows we found it," I said. And in that moment, from the far end of the chamber, I saw her. The nun's figure emerged from the dark, her veil fluttering, though no wind blew. This time, her face was not hidden.